It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
May 27th, 1991, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A 14-year-old boy runs into the street, naked, bleeding, drugged out of his mind. Neighbors call the police. 3 officers arrive. They find the boy. They find the man who hurt him, calm, polite, explaining everything away. The officers listen to the man. They do not listen to the boy. They walk him back into the building. 30 minutes later, he is dead. The man's name is Jeffrey Dahmer. And this is not the worst thing he did that year. It is not even close. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer is born the first son of Lionel Dahmer, a chemistry student, and Joyce Dahmer, a teletype instructor. On paper, an ordinary family. Underneath, something else. Joyce struggles with her nerves throughout the pregnancy and after it. The marriage is tense from the start. Full of arguments, neither parent hides from the children. Lionel buries himself in his studies. He is gone more than he is home. A second son, David, is born 6 years later. By then, something in Jeffrey has already gone quiet. People who knew the family describe a boy who pulls inward, not violent, not loud, just absent, even when he is in the room. There is a detail that keeps surfacing in every serious account of his childhood. Dahmer develops a fascination with dead animals. He collects roadkill from the streets near his house. He dissects it. He keeps the bones. This is not, by itself, a prophecy. Plenty of children are curious about death and grow into ordinary adults. But for Dahmer, the fascination does not fade. It deepens quietly for years, while the adults around him are too consumed by their own collapsing marriage to notice. In 1978, his parents divorce. Jeffrey is 18. He graduates high school the same year, already drinking heavily, already alone in a house that is, within months, about to empty out completely. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should, because the first murder happens in that house, while his father is away, while his mother has already moved out with his younger brother, while, for one summer, Jeffrey Dahmer is, for all practical purposes, unsupervised. June 18th, 1978, Bath, Ohio. Stephen Hicks is 18 years old, a hitchhiker, thumb out on the road, heading to a rock concert. Dahmer pulls over. He offers Hicks a ride, then an invitation. Come back to my house. Have a few beers. Hicks says yes. There is no reason not to. Dahmer is polite, forgettable, the kind of stranger you forget by morning. They drink, they talk, and at some point in that empty house, Hicks tries to leave. Dahmer will not let him. He picks up a barbell. He strikes Hicks from behind. He strangles him with it until he stops moving. Dahmer will later tell investigators he had sex with the body. Then he panics and does what panicking 18-year-olds with a corpse in the house do badly. He hides it. He drags Hicks into the crawl space. He cuts the body apart. He buries the pieces in the backyard, shallow, in the dark, alone. Weeks later, worried the remains will surface, he digs them back up, dissolves what he can in acid, and scatters the rest along a roadside. No one searches the Dahmer property. No one connects a missing hitchhiker to a quiet teenager 2 counties over. Stephen Hicks simply disappears. One name on a list of young men who vanish every year and are never found. Dahmer will not kill again for 9 years, not because the urge fades. By his own account, it never does. He simply does not have, in his words, the opportunity. Dahmer enrolls at Ohio State University that fall. He lasts 1 semester. The drinking does not stop. It gets worse. His father, hoping structure will fix what nothing else has, pushes him toward the army. Dahmer enlists in 1979, trains as a medic, and is stationed in Baumholder, Germany. The military discharges him in 1981. The official reason is alcoholism. He is, by every account from the men who served with him, drinking through entire days. He drifts back to Ohio, then gets arrested for public intoxication. A judge finds him and lets him go. Nobody in the system flags him as dangerous because, on paper, he is not. He is a discharged soldier with a drinking problem. That description fits thousands of men. It does not, on its own, predict 17 murders. Eventually, he moves to Wisconsin, into his grandmother's house in West Allis, just outside Milwaukee. She is religious, kind, and has no idea what she is sharing a roof with. For a while, this looks like stability. He holds down a job. He keeps the drinking somewhat contained. The house is quiet. It will not stay that way. September 15th, 1987. The Ambassador Hotel, downtown Milwaukee. Dahmer meets Stephen Tuomi at a gay bar. They drink. They go back to a hotel room together. What happens next, by Dahmer's own account, is fog. He says he blacks out. He says he wakes up with his hands around Tuomi's throat, and Tuomi is dead, and he has no memory of how it happened. It is possible to read that account as a true blackout. It is also possible to read it as the first time the urge from 1978 finally finds, again, an opportunity. Either way, the result is the same. Dahmer buys a suitcase, folds Tuomi's body into it, and carries it out of a downtown hotel in broad daylight. 9 years of silence end here, and this time, there is no 9-year pause after it. What follows over the next year is a pattern Dahmer will repeat, with small variations, for the rest of his killing life.
At first it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive. And so it just spiraled out of control.
January 16th, 1988. James Dockstader, 14 years old, a runaway who left home to escape an abusive stepfather. Dahmer finds him at a bus stop, offers money, brings him to his grandmother's house. March 24th, 1988. Richard Guerrero offered $50 to spend the night. Both boys are drugged with sleeping pills, then killed. Both disappear into the same pattern of missing persons reports that go nowhere because both come from the margins of the city. Young, poor, easy to overlook. Then, in September 1988, Dahmer makes a mistake that should have ended everything. He approaches a 13-year-old boy, Somsak Syntha, offers him money for photographs, drugs him, and assaults him. This time, the boy escapes. This time, there is a victim alive to testify. Dahmer is arrested, convicted of second-degree sexual assault. A judge sentences him to 8 years. Then, after Dahmer writes a letter expressing remorse, that same judge cuts the sentence down. Dahmer serves less than 1 year on a work release program and walks free in 1990 on probation. Remember that name, Syntha Somphone. It will come back in the worst possible way in less than a year. While out on bail awaiting that sentence, Dahmer kills again. March 25th, 1989. Anthony Sears, 24, an aspiring model Dahmer meets at a club called La Cage. This is the murder where something changes. Dahmer does not just kill Sears, he preserves him. He boils the flesh from his skull and keeps it. He keeps the genitals, too, in a box. This is the beginning of what investigators will later call his trophy collecting. Up to this point, the killings were about the act itself. From here forward, they are also about keeping something behind. A piece of the person that does not decay, does not leave, does not say no. After his release from the work release program in 1990, Dahmer's grandmother, increasingly unsettled by the late-night visitors and the smell coming from the basement, asks him to move out. He gets his own apartment. Unit 213, the Oxford Apartments, a low-income building on Milwaukee's near South Side. From here, there is no one left to ask questions. Between May 1990 and July 1991, Dahmer kills at least 12 more men inside that one-bedroom apartment. The method becomes a routine, almost mechanical, in how little it changes. He finds men at gay bars, bus stops, the public library, the mall. He offers money for nude photographs or simply company and beer. He brings them home. He drugs their drinks with sleeping pills, sometimes crushed into beer, sometimes into mixed drinks. Once they are unconscious, he strangles them. After death, the pattern continues. He has sex with the bodies. He photographs them, posing the corpses, building a private collection of Polaroids he keeps in a cabinet. He dismembers them in his bathtub. He keeps skulls, boils away the flesh, paints some of them, bleaches the bone. He keeps body parts in his refrigerator and a chest freezer alongside food. And, repeatedly, he eats parts of them. Dahmer will later describe this, in his own words, as wanting to make his victims a permanent part of him. Not a metaphor, literal. The court psychiatrists who examine him afterward describe a man for whom intimacy and control had become inseparable. A man so terrified of being left that his solution was to make leaving impossible. Eating, to him, was the final, irreversible way of keeping someone. He is, at the same time, attempting something even stranger. With at least 2 of his living victims, he tries to create what he calls a sex zombie. He drugs a man into unconsciousness, drills a hole into the skull, and injects either acid or boiling water directly into the brain. He is trying, in his own mind, to produce a compliant, living, permanently obedient companion. It never works. Every man he tries this on dies, usually within a day, sometimes after regaining brief, disoriented consciousness first. May 27, 1991. Dahmer lures a 14-year-old boy to apartment 213 with the same offer he has used for years: money in exchange for photographs. The boy's name is Chronicles Synthesomphone. He is the younger brother of the 13-year-old Dahmer assaulted in 1988. Dahmer does not know that. It does not matter. He has found, by accident, the same family twice. Inside the apartment, Dahmer drugs him. While the boy is unconscious, Dahmer drills a hole into his skull and injects acid into the wound, the same zombie experiment he has tried before. Then Dahmer steps out to buy more alcohol. While he is gone, Chronicles wakes up. Naked, bleeding, barely able to stand, he stumbles out of the building and into the street. 2 women, Sandra Smith and Nicole Childress, find him first. He cannot speak coherently. He is clearly a child, clearly hurt, clearly drugged. They call the police. 3 officers respond. Dahmer returns while they are on scene and tells them Chronicles is his boyfriend, an adult, simply drunk after an argument. He says it calmly. He says it convincingly. The women on the street protest. They tell the officers this is a child. They tell the officers something is wrong. The officers do not check Dahmer's identification, which would have shown he was a registered sex offender on probation for molesting a child from this exact family. They do not get the boy medical attention. One officer later admits he smelled something foul in the apartment, the early decomposition of a body Dahmer had killed 3 days earlier, lying in the next room. They walk Chronicles Synthesomphone back into that apartment. and hand him back to Dahmer. 10 minutes later, Dahmer's neighbor, Glenda Cleveland, calls the police herself, worried about what she watched happen outside her window. She gets through to one of the responding officers. She asks if the boy was a child. She is told the situation is handled. Within the hour, Conarak Synthesomphone is dead. This is the part of the story that true crime coverage often rushes past, because it is uncomfortable in a different way than the murders themselves. It implicates a system, not just one man. Look at who Dahmer was able to kill again and again without consequence. James Doxtator, Richard Guerrero, Anthony Sears, Ernest Miller, Curtis Straughter, Errol Lindsay, Tony Hughes, Conarak Synthesomphone, Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, Joseph Braidhoft, black men, Latino men, Asian immigrants, gay men, teenage runaways, men whose disappearances were filed, if they were filed at all, as one more name in a city that, at the time, did not treat their lives with the same urgency as it treated others. Glenda Cleveland did not stop after that one phone call. She called again, days later, after seeing Conarak's photo in a missing persons report in the newspaper. She asked if anyone had followed up. No one had. She called again. Same result. She tried the FBI, nothing. The officers who handed Conarak back to Dahmer were recorded afterward on a dispatch tape, joking about reuniting the two lovers. That recording becomes public once Dahmer's arrest exposes everything. Public outrage follows. The officers are fired. Then, 2 years later, a judge reinstates them. Both men return to the police force with back pay. One of them later becomes the head of the Milwaukee Police Union. This is not a footnote to the Dahmer case. It is the reason the body count reached 17 instead of stopping much earlier. 5 of his murders happen after Glenda Cleveland's first warning to police went unanswered. The final 2 months of Dahmer's freedom moved faster than anything before them. June 30th, Matt Turner. Dahmer meets him at a bus station in Chicago and brings him back to Milwaukee. Early July. Jeremiah Weinberger in Chicago, lured the same way. Dahmer tries the zombie experiment on him too, drilling, injecting. Weinberger survives over a day in a drugged, dying state before Dahmer finally strangles him. He keeps the head in the freezer and dissolves the torso in a drum of acid. July 15th. Oliver Lacey, July 19th. Dahmer is fired from his job at a chocolate factory. The same day, he meets Joseph Braidhoft and brings him home. By the 3rd week of July, Dahmer's apartment holds the remains of multiple victims at once. A freezer he can barely close. A refrigerator with a head inside it. 57-gallon drums in the corner of the bedroom, filled with acid, dissolving what is left of the men he has not finished processing. He is, by every later account, planning to build something he describes as an altar, a shrine made from the skulls and bones of his victims, meant to surround a black table where he would sit. He tells investigators, after his arrest, that if they had come 6 months later, that is what they would have found. They come on July 22nd. July 22nd, 1991. Dahmer approaches 3 men at a shopping mall, offers each $100 to come pose for photographs, drink, and keep him company. 2 say no, 1 says yes. His name is Tracy Edwards. Back at the apartment, the routine starts the same way it always does. Drinks, conversation. But this time, something shifts. Dahmer handcuffs one of Edwards' wrists, holds a knife to him, and tells him to undress. Edwards does not lose his nerve. He talks. He stays calm, agrees, plays along, watching for an opening, while Dahmer, oddly, becomes more relaxed, even affectionate. resting his head against Edwards's chest at one point to listen to his heartbeat. It is the opening Edwards needs. He strikes Dahmer, breaks free, and runs out of the apartment with one handcuff still locked around his wrist. He flags down a police car on the street. The officers bring Edwards back toward the building. Dahmer, again, tries his usual approach. Calm, cooperative, explaining there is a simple misunderstanding. This time, it does not work. The cuff on Edwards' wrist is real. His story holds together. The officers go inside the apartment to check. They open the refrigerator first. Inside the refrigerator, a human head. In the bedroom, 2 more skulls. A freezer packed with body parts. A filing cabinet holding Polaroid photographs of victims, alive and dead, posed in the apartment over years. 57-gallon drums in the corner, filled with acid, dissolving torsos. The investigation that follows recovers the remains of 11 men inside that apartment. Combined with the murders he confesses to from earlier years, the total reaches 17. Dahmer is arrested on the spot. Over the following 2 weeks, 2 detectives, Patrick Kennedy and Dennis Murphy, interview him for more than 60 hours combined. He waives his right to a lawyer and confesses to everything, in detail, calmly, the same way he once calmly explained away a bleeding 14-year-old boy to 3 police officers. He tells them he wanted to confess. He says it only makes sense he does everything he can to put an end to the horror he created. Dahmer's trial opens in January 1992. He pleads not guilty by reason of insanity, the only real strategy available to a man who has already confessed to everything else. Psychiatrists for the defense and the prosecution both examine him. The diagnoses that come out of those evaluations include borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder involving necrophilia. Real conditions seriously considered by the court. But insanity, under the law, requires something specific, not just mental illness. Proof that the person could not understand right from wrong or could not control their actions because of that illness. The jury does not buy it. Dahmer evaded police for 13 years. He drugged his victims deliberately. He cleaned up after himself. He lied convincingly to officers standing in his own doorway. None of that looks like a man who could not tell right from wrong. It looks like a man who knew exactly what he was doing and did it anyway. On February 15, 1992, the jury finds him guilty and legally sane on all counts. He is sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in Wisconsin. Later, prosecutors in Ohio convict him for the original 1978 murder of Stephen Hicks, adding a 16th life sentence. There is no scenario under any of these sentences in which Jeffrey Dahmer ever walks free again. Dahmer is sent to Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. For his own safety, he spends much of his first year in isolation. Eventually, he is allowed into the general population for supervised work details. He converts to Christianity, is baptized in May 1994, and tells his prison minister he wants to make peace with what he did. Not every inmate is interested in his peace. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer is assigned to a cleaning detail in the prison gym, alongside 2 other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. Guards leave the 3 of them unsupervised for roughly 20 minutes. Scarver, who has been carrying a newspaper clipping detailing Dahmer's crimes, follows him into a locker room and confronts him with it. Then he picks up a metal bar from the weight room. He strikes Dahmer twice. Dahmer does not fight back. According to Scarver, his last words are that he does not care whether he lives or dies. Dahmer is rushed to a hospital. He is pronounced dead within the hour. He is 34 years old. His mother, Joyce, hears the news and asks the press one bitter question. Now is everybody happy? The families of his victims are split. Some say they finally feel some peace. Others say nothing has changed because the men he killed are still gone, and a quick death in a prison gym does not undo 17 lives. The Oxford apartments are demolished the year after Dahmer's arrest. The lot sits empty for years before something new is built there. The two officers who handed Konarak synthesomphone back to his killer return to the force with back pay and go on to long careers. One leads the police union. The city eventually pays a settlement to the synthesomphone family, an amount of money that buys nothing back. What stays underneath the trophies and the acid drums and everything that made this story famous is a simpler and uglier fact. Jeffrey Dahmer was not undetectable. He was reported. He was seen. Bleeding boys running into the street, neighbors calling again and again, an arrest record that should have followed him everywhere he went. He kept killing for 13 years, not because he was invisible, but because, for most of that time, the men and boys he chose were the kind of victims a system was willing to overlook. That is the part of this story that should stay with you longer than the freezer or the acid or the trophies in the cabinet. Somewhere in a missing persons file from 1978 to 1991, there may still be a name that was never connected to apartment 213. Dahmer himself was never fully certain of his own count.